on the hardwood.
Well, in the playoffs so far, unders have been the play. 41-24. Favorites are 44-22 straight up, and 35-31 against the number. We start in Milwaukee, a critical game 6 where the Bucks can close it out. Celtics are plus 105 on the money line. The Bucks are minus 125. Bucks laying a 1.5. Total set at 217.5. It is a 7:30 start in the East. Chelsea, my lean here initially is I think I would just take the Bucks on the money line. I feel like that loss by the Celtics when they were in Boston was so demoralizing. They should have won that game. They absolutely blew it. They had a 14-point lead going into the fourth quarter, and then Drew Holiday just owned them. Now the Bucks have all the momentum. I think they close it out tonight.
It's hard to go against the Bucks here, especially at home, especially with the way that their role players played even on the road, because usually that's the consensus is the role players play better at home than they do on the road. But it was Drew Holiday making 2 great defensive plays at the end of that game that really helped the Bucks win. Obviously, Giannis had 40 points, certainly helped too, but you need those role players to chip in those final moments because it's not going to be your star player who's open for those big shots or he needs a bit of help on defense. So for me, it's probably the Bucks. And I also thought about an under here because usually when we talk about elimination games, they play a little tighter and the defense really clamps down. The possessions are more decisive and you're looking for more open shots, which leads to slower possessions for most of these teams. But the total is 211.5, which is lower than most of these games. These totals have been slowly creeping lower and lower. They started at 217.5 and now all the way down to 211 and a hook. Jenks, do you have a play on the total?
I don't. Every now and then I'll play a total, but here I'm going to stay away. I'm just all in on Milwaukee, and I just love the fact I'm surprised. I had the Celtics winning this series, and they may still do it. They certainly have the talent because in the second half of the NBA season, Chelsea, the Boston Celtics were the best team in all of the NBA. And what they've done in this series is revert back to some of those frustrating habits that we saw early in the season for the Celtics, which is building up big leads, then not playing smart and letting these leads go. They locked down on defense, and we had not seen that Celtics team for a long time, but all of a sudden, that group that couldn't hold a lead has reemerged in this series, and the way the Bucks have adjusted and the way they're playing good defense, I think they've flustered the Celtics. And I also wanted to ask you this. When you have a demoralizing loss, and even the Celtics know, they admit, we blew it, we had it, do you take that into account when you look at the next game, or is that negligible?
I think we've seen it in the postseason where a lot of these teams come back from losses, and this series has gone back and forth. Bucks, Celtics, Bucks, Celtics, Bucks. So I'm not ready to count out the Celtics just yet. Do you think we're overreacting to that last win for the Bucks? Because the Celtics were up almost the entire game.
Well, maybe we are, and there's always that danger of recency bias, right? You see one game and you say, oh, it's over, and that's not a smart way to bet because you have to look at each individual matchup. But I do think there is something to the fact that you're in a position where you can close out because this is the postseason and you don't do it. And conversely, I think the Bucks know we do not want this series to go back to Boston. We need to take care of business here at home. And it's such a short spread. I know during the regular season, the Bucks weren't great at home against the number, but it is the playoffs. I think they are the better team in this series, so I'm rolling with Milwaukee. What about the Grizz and the Warriors? It is the late game, 10 o'clock in the East. The Grizz are plus 290 on the money line. The Warriors laying 375. The Warriors a huge 8.5-point favorite. Total set at 217.5. Chelsea, what are you thinking?
I think this is too big of a spread for me to stomach laying with the Warriors. 8.5 seems a touch high for a Grizzlies team that's proven that they can play without John Morant. I know that we've seen some blowouts in this series so far, but Jenks, doesn't 8.5 seem a touch too high for a game in which the Grizzlies have proven they can run with the Warriors?
The opposite. I feel like this line is a trap, and I think bettors are going to see 8.5, and they're going to look at how the Grizzlies just dominated Golden State, and people are going to hammer Memphis. But I think what we're going to see is the Golden State team that we usually see when they play out in San Francisco, They were just not motivated, and they admitted they did not come to play. They did not take the seriousness of the moment the way they should have. Now the Grizzlies have their attention, and this is exactly what we saw earlier in this series, right? Where the Grizzlies beat the Warriors. Then the next game, the Warriors are laying 6.5 points in game 3, and we thought, oh, too many points. What happened? The Warriors blew them out. I think we may see something like that tonight, so I'm going to lay the 8.5 with Golden State. I know it seems high. I do think it's the right side.
Let's talk about a total for just a second.
Okay.
Because I just talked about elimination games and unders. 217.5. It is higher than 211.5 that we saw in the other game. But we've seen these totals fly over when they're overs. Like we've seen the Grizzlies score 134 points. We've seen the Warriors score 142 points. But looking at this Grizzlies team without Ja Morant, they play better defense. And obviously there's a huge hole in their offense where Ja Morant was. So looking at a total, do you have a leaning one way or another?
I really don't here, Chelsea. Totals have been so hard for me to figure out during this. I honestly, I think I would probably go over just because we always talk about the narrative and how you think a game is going to play out, which influences your bet. And I think the Warriors are going to put up a ton of points. I know the Grizzlies are a better team defensively without Ja Morant, and the metrics bear that out. But I think the Warriors put on a show tonight. I think that's how the game is going to go. So I'm going to go over.
We'll see. I'm hoping for some good games, though. I think the Bucks Celtics is the series that I am ready for it to be over because I feel like it has just been so hard to handicap.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Okay, I get that. I thought you were just over the series in general. I thought that's been a really good series.
No, it's been great games, but how am I supposed to pick a side? I feel like those two teams are so evenly matched that it has been difficult for me to go on these radio shows and give a definitive answer on who I think is going to win a game because I don't have a definitive answer.
That's how I feel on a Friday. How am I supposed to give picks when I got the weekend staring me in the face in an hour? It feels like the same thing, Chelsea. Tonight, as the games are unfolding, you can listen to BetMGM tonight with Quentin Mayo, Ryan Horvath, and Trista Crick. How cool is this? They react in real time and also instantly offer their advice for in-game wagering. It is all on BetQL and all available on the Odyssey app. She's Chelsea Messenger. I'm Michael Jenkins. It is always great to be with you on a Friday morning. Thanks for being with us. Coming up in 10 minutes, what does the NFL schedule release mean for front office and coaches? I'm laughing because I posted that video on Instagram yesterday. As soon as I mentioned NFL schedules, your eyes just rolled back in your head. And I thought, you know what? For once, Chelsea, we're on the same side. It wasn't the most exciting night, but now that we do have this schedule released by the NFL, we have week 1 games, and we do have some odds on the board. And interestingly enough, 11 road teams are the favorites in week 1. That is the most in NFL history. So we've got the slate right in front of us. What are a few games, even though we're probably not going to bet in May, what are a few of the games that stand out to you?
To be clear, I'm rolling my eyes at the fact that the NFL had a 3-hour show dedicated to the NFL schedule release. It's not the fact that we have some lines on these games, because that is exciting. And looking at some of these initial lines, a couple stand out to me. I think at first glance, you take a look at the big spreads and you see if any of these home teams have a shot, because a home team getting more than a touchdown, looking at the Colts, they're laying 7.5 at the Texans. That's still a divisional matchup, and maybe the Texans are a touch better this year. I don't know. Maybe they can keep it close. And then the Niners laying 6.5 on the road at the Bears. The Niners are probably going to be starting a rookie quarterback in Trey Lance. Do they deserve to be almost a touchdown or almost 7-point favorites on the road at the Bears? Maybe the Bears are terrible this year, but still, I think Justin Fields has some room for improvement. And plus, they can play terrible and still cover this number. And then finally, the squares play that I see that probably is still a winner. The Ravens -4 on the road at the Jets. Are you kidding me? The Ravens make their living on beating up on bad teams because they run the ball, and usually bad teams can't stop the run. It's the postseason that has given the Ravens some troubles. But the Ravens, a fully healthy squad, I'm at least hoping, it's May, but still laying 4 against the Jets. Yeah, I'll be on the Ravens.
The squares play I see on the board, I think, is Broncos -4 at the Seahawks on Monday Night Football. Russell Wilson going back to Seattle in prime time. He's going to know the stadium. He knows the environment. He has a much better team, and he's going against Drew Lock. I'm not worried about Drew Lock showing out against his former team, particularly against that Broncos defense. And already, Chelsea, I would fade the Seahawks across the board because the Seahawks offense is stuck in like 2008. And their game plan on offense was just give Russ the football and let's see what he can do. He way overperformed what he should be expected to do because of those constraints. And now we're asking Drew Lock in that very same offense to run the show. I just don't see it at all. It seems square to me, but I think Russ and the Broncos roll the Seahawks. So I'm looking at Broncos -4. And also, I like the Steelers getting 6 on the road in Cincinnati. I still think because of what we saw in the Super Bowl and the Bengals making that run, that they're a touch overvalued. And I know it's Mitch Trubisky. I get that, but I trust Mike Tomlin.
Steelers were great as underdogs last season, too.
Yeah.
I remember that being one of the trends, despite having one of the worst offenses I've ever seen, where Big Ben throws it 2.5 yards to the open receiver, and they're moving the ball at snail's pace. And maybe Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett, they're not going to be great, but the offense wasn't good last year either, and they still covered a lot of numbers. So I wouldn't talk you off that one. But it is May, so please remember that we have several months until the NFL season, and be careful. Don't bet on these games just yet.
Exactly. When Big Ben threw 2.5 yards, that was a bomb. That was a deep ball for him last year. His arm was so shot.